morning, friends. Today I want to talk about Sartre. Sartre is one of the progenitors of the French existentialist movement, which came about 100 years after the German idealists. In the history of philosophy, in the history of Western philosophy, they were incredibly relevant. They were dealing with lots of issues to do with freedom and the self and our role in the universe and whether the universe has a role for us, really. And one of the most famous lines from not being in Nothingness, but one of his lectures that he gave was existence precedes essence. And what this means is that you exist prior to any meaning is created in your life. And one of the most relevant aspects of Sartre's philosophy, and why I really want to talk about him today, is that we create the meaning in our lives. And there is an entire philosophical argument in here about why it is that we are the creators of meaning and not why meaning is presupposed in our existence. So if that sounds interesting to you, stick around. I think Sartre's philosophy is really good if you're going through a specific crisis and you're like seeing something in one specific way and you're like what can I do about it? It's just the way it is, and you're just feeling like really crap about something. I think it's really good to realize that we're in control of the narrative that we assign ourselves and assign our lives and assign the events in our lives. And what's really interesting is at the end of this book, Sartre addresses some of the most sort of limiting things or seemingly limiting things about our existence, such as our death, the place we're born, the language we speak, stuff that we don't really have control over, and concludes that in fact these things do not limit our freedom as well. So how he pulls that off will be discussed in this video, so if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned. So being in Nothingness really begins with a discussion of negation, the origin of negation, how negation is enters into the world, and negation comes from the empty, nothingness, the opposite of being, really. And Sartre argues that we are the ones who introduce negation into the world. Our conscious existence, when I say we, I'm talking about a universal objective we. Our conscious existence introduces this idea of nothingness into the world. What this means is that we are able to expect things of the world that aren't necessarily like physically there. For example, I can see a toaster because it's right in front of me, but I can also not see a spaceship. I can imagine a spaceship being here, and thus my experience of the current room is structured around the fact that there is not a spaceship in it. This is something that only conscious beings can do. Is expect something of the world and shape their perspective based on physical things that are not in the world. So Sartre discusses the example of Pierre in the cafe, and it's very similar to the example I just gave, which is that if you're expecting to see Pierre in the cafe, you're expecting that he'll meet you there, and he's not there, the entire cafe, the essence of the cafe feels different, purely on the basis that Pierre is not in the cafe. This is completely different from if, David Bowie wasn't in the cafe, because you were never expecting David Bowie to be in the cafe. Whereas your expectation of Pierre in the cafe or not in the cafe has completely impacted your experience of said cafe. One of the fun things about reading Sartre are these examples that are just very French, very stereotypically French, so I would definitely recommend reading for that purpose. Another thing about Sartre, not just Pierre in the cafe, but the number of examples that he gives that are related to life, taken straight from our phenomenological experience, which is the experience of the world as we experience it, straight up, nothing, just a fancy word for experience, the way we experience it. Because philosophers like to make the distinction a lot of the time between the phenomenal world and the world as it really is. They make this distinction of appearance versus reality. And, there might be some truth in that. We have to think about whether the world really is the way it is or whether our perception alters the way that it is and the way that we perceive it. But Sartre takes examples straight from life. There's another example in here called The Look, which is one of the most comprehensive, his exploration of this topic is one of the most comprehensive in all of philosophy, all of Western philosophy. And it's quite impressive, actually, the way that he discusses it. So the look is basically an exploration of the experience of being seen. The reason that this is important is to do with the distinction between subjects and objects. So for example, I right now am a subject, but at the same time I am looking at myself speaking to this camera. And so in seeing myself, or looking in a mirror, or being looked at by another, I am hyper aware of my reality, not only as a subject, but as an object in other people's view. So for example, for you right now watching this video, I am an object. And you know, you might be able to extend your view of me to incorporate the fact that I am a subject, but the important thing is that first glance, I am just another object in your world. And so the look is exactly that. If I am looking through a keyhole into another room, and I'm observing people, and in that sense I am behaving as a subject, the experience of being seen looking through the keyhole, so assuming that there's another subject that's just been made, I've just been made aware of their presence, I am filled with this feeling of shame, this immediate feeling of like, oh no, I'm being watched. I am now the object, you know, even though I was the subject just a split second ago. The existence of another introduces this duality, this dichotomy that's really like difficult, because philosophically speaking, like, we need to be affirmed of ourselves and of our existences and like what our essences are. Of course, existence precedes essence, as we discussed at the beginning. So does that mean that others can decide our essence for us? It's a difficult concept. Others are a really difficult concept that I'm writing an essay about at the moment, and it's really interesting to talk about. But I'm gonna move on from others because it's just way too big of a topic, and I'm gonna move straight on to freedom. So in terms of freedom, I mentioned that Sartre doesn't take facts of life, of existence, to be necessary limitations on our freedom. But how is this the case? What is it about our introduction into the world, our conscious beings introducing negation into the world, that allows us to be free? Freedom for Sartre is really the freedom to make meaning in our lives. So the way that he understands freedom is through the idea of projects. Projects are really projects in the sense of the word that we use nowadays. So I might take on a project by creating this video. I might take on a project by trying to write a book. He talks in a very meta way about himself writing the book, in trying to explain the idea of projects and how we understand the world through these projects. So my existence thus far and all of the experiences that I've had that have led me up to this point can be explained by me, according to Sartre, in hindsight, because we always see life as structured according to our projects. This idea that we are the ones who structure the world and the world is not pre-structured for us, and the idea that knowledge is knowledge of the way we understand the world and not knowledge of the world as it is. This is a Kantian idea. Kant was he was a transcendental idealist, and that what all that means is that he influenced a lot of people to rethink our relation to the world. So Sartre is taking this Kantian idea and he is modifying it slightly to involve a much more tangible, in my opinion, thing, which is projects. We all, I think we can all self-evidently agree that our projects do shape the way that we understand the world. For example, if I'm trying to get to the train station at the moment, I'm going to understand my day in terms of getting to that train station. In a larger sphere, if I am currently in a project of trying to start up my YouTube channel and get it going and collaborating with people, I'm gonna understand my interactions and my learning and my everything as being directed towards this goal. And essentially the flexibility of these projects equates to the authenticity of our freedom. The fact that I can decide one day to stop doing YouTube and start shaping my life and my understanding of my life according to the new project that I am taking up means that I am essentially free to understand the world in whatever way I want, and I'm free to determine myself and my life in whatever way I want. One of the biggest things I love about Sartre is how kind of relevant this is and how kind of applicable it is to our everyday life. The existentialists really did have a kind of direct link to our experience. But not only that, Sartre is trying to create an ontology, trying to create something that is beyond physical, but rooting it in physical experience. So he doesn't invoke God. This is one of the basic premises of Sartre, is that there is no God in his universe, which is great for a philosopher, maybe not so great for peace of mind in the world. But Sartre is really trying to ground phenomenology, but equally ground metaphysics and the beyond physical, and ideas of God and existence and meaning and identity. And he's really trying to get to the root of all of these massive issues in philosophy, really the core issues of philosophy according to him. So the origin of negation, he talks about bad faith, which I haven't really mentioned, but that's the idea that because of this freedom that we cannot escape, we're condemned to be free. Because of this freedom, we get into this we experience this anxiety, this anguish that forces us to sort of deny our own freedom and try to participate in a system that is prescribed for us, that convinces us that we're not actually free and that we have to follow this specific order. Religion is a really big example of what Sartre would call bad faith, but many things can be bad faith, many things. Bad faith, he talks about others, he talks about the self and the different aspects of the self. I mentioned the look and a few examples of how you exist as a subject, but also as an object for other people. And so really, I feel like you can gain a lot from Sartre, and you can gain a lot, especially in the conversation about freedom. No, I might not, if I were you, that is, and I'm not a philosopher and don't really care about the philosophical lingo, I would not read this book cover to cover. I personally might read this book cover to cover if I one day have the time to, but I highly recommend trying to pick a chapter of the book and giving it a go, because going to lectures for Sartre, I was in the first few chapters that we were reading, I was thrown into the deep end and really had no idea what the relevance of this kind of philosophy is. And a lot of time in philosophy, I feel like people don't really understand the relevance of the conversation, but I definitely think that Sartre is one of the most relevant philosophers, especially in terms of existentialism and that you create your own meaning, really hammering down on that freedom point. At first, I was, like I said, thrown into the deep end, but definitely upon returning to Sartre again and again and again, I gained a lot of kind of self-assurance from reading this. And in spite of the fact that existentialism has a bad rap for kind of throwing people into the void and making them think that they don't matter and all of this stuff, you might not matter on a fundamental universal level, but you definitely matter to yourself, and you exist for yourself, and your existence is determined by yourself, and that's really awesome. Freedom is so important. And a really big problem German idealists before Sartre were trying to solve is the problem of freedom, because it seems to us that the world is determined causally. I mean, this is a topic for another video. If you wanna see that video, definitely let me know down below. But the world is determined causally, and yet we seem to have this freedom of thought and freedom of mind and freedom of ideas. And does that mean that we are actually free, or is that just an illusion? And again, back to the appearance and reality distinction. And as I do more of these videos, because I do really enjoy making brief summaries of really complex texts, as I make more of these videos, I'm sure we will see these themes come up again and again and again. So the book that you can read if you are not interested in reading Being and Nothingness is Existentialism is a Humanism. It's much more simple, and it's really giving you a wider picture of existentialism as a movement and what it's trying to achieve. Also, Sartre was a novelist, I completely forgot to mention, but Sartre was not just a straight-up philosopher. He was a novelist, and he was really trying to figure out the aspects of these philosophical problems through real experiences. So he wrote Nausea, and he wrote a bunch of other novels that are trying to depict the phenomenon of existence according to his own philosophy. So I think it would be really interesting to actually read some of Sartre's fiction and sort of compare it to his straight up philosophy and see whether like literature or philosophy is more effective. I mean, that's a discussion I'm really interested in, because a lot of the time you're reading philosophy and it's not very accessible, and you're like, what's the point of philosophy if it's not accessible, you know? But some people think, you know, the more technical it is, the better it is, and if few people understand it, like, it doesn't really matter. You know, it's a philosopher's territory, not layman's territory. But I disagree. I think philosophy should be accessible, and it should be like utilized by every single individual who can grasp it. And there's so much of it that can be easy to grasp. It's just like explained so badly. So please let me know if I'm explaining anything like way too complicated or terribly. I really want to work on my like accessibility when I'm explaining philosophy. So please let me know down below. And let me know if you've read any of Sartre's fiction or any of his other essays, or if you want to see more about Sartre specifically, or if you want to see just more in general about the history of philosophy. Let me know what you guys think of this book down below. Let me know what aspect of his philosophy you find most interesting. Let me know if you've read any other French existentialists. I would love to talk about that. And let me know if you have any questions down below about this, if I didn't explain something well enough, or if you'd like me to give you a specific recommendation of what to read in here, if you'd like me to elaborate on anything, or if you like this kind of brief summary of Sartre's Being and Nothingness, or philosophical text in general. Let me know if you want to see more of stuff like this in the future. Thank you guys for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in another video very soon. All right, have a great day, everyone.